What do you call this? It may look like a humble mango to you, but to me, it's the perfect metaphor for the London accent. I grew up in a lower middle class neighborhood of London, and I remember hearing a variety of London accents just on my street. The postman didn't sound like the milkman. Yes, we had a milkman. The lady across the street who worked in the library had a different way of speaking from the old guy who fought in the war. And the student down the road who had a Mohican had yet another accent. In other words, it was a typical London street. What are the accents of London? There are 8 million Londoners. And if you ask that question to each of them, you probably get 8 million different answers. But this is my take. Today on Let Them Talk TV, the accents of London. Stay tuned, it'll be fruity. These are the accents of London. The London accent. Please don't say estuary English. I'll explain why. The Cockney accent. Is that something different, or is it just another way of saying the London accent? We'll investigate. Standard Southern British English. Every hip person knows that these days we say SSBE and not RP. The posh accent. And 22% of Londoners do not have English as their mother tongue. We'll also have a look at that. London accents are constantly evolving, and one accent you'll hear nowadays across London is MLE, Multicultural London English. For the section on Multicultural London English, I'm delighted to say that I'll be joined by accent coach Luke Nicholson, and together we're going to analyse the accent of a famous MLE speaker, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Now, all the accents in this list have a few things in common. Okay, in the South, we have the R vowel in words such as bath, path, calm, start. A bath and trap are pronounced differently in all these London accents, whereas in some northern accents, including Manchester and Liverpool, they'll say them the same, bath and trap. Likewise, everyone in London will say blood, not blood, as they do up north, and they'll say southern, not southern, young, not young, as our friends in the north do. All the London accents are non-rhotic, which means we only pronounce the R before a vowel. So we say car, party, mother in the West Country, in Scotland, and in standard American accent, it is rhotic. So they'll say something like car, party, mother. Excuse my bad American accent. But now let's focus on the differences. First, let's look at the London accent. Please don't say estuary English. Some people even accuse me of having an estuary accent, but I don't. And do you know why? Because I didn't grow up anywhere near an estuary. In fact, most people in London don't grow up next to the river. The London accent stretches beyond London. So that's not a perfect term either. But many of the towns and cities where they speak it live far, far away from the River Thames. The accent of London can be heard in the southeast, roughly from Luton in the north to Brighton in the south. Anyway, here are a few features of a London accent, a working class London accent. Bear in mind that not all Londoners have all these features, and I'll come to that soon. H dropping. Happy becomes appy. So in a sentence, he hopes his horse is happy becomes he hopes his horse is happy. L vocalization. The L sound at the end of words or before a consonant can sound more like a vowel or W. So, for example, milk might sound like milk. Bull like bull. So in a sentence, tell Phil to give me a bell. Tell Phil to give me a bell. I told all the girls to drink cold milk. The unvoiced TH becomes an F. So thanks becomes thanks. Month becomes month. And three and free sound the same. Free. So in a sentence, thanks for the free theatre tickets for Macbeth. Now the voice th, as in this and that, stays the same when it's this and that, but between consonants or at the end of a word, it may sound more like a V sound. So for example, father, I loathe my father's leather clothes. Now the T, an unstressed T, you lose it and replace it with a glottal stop. So for example, water becomes water, but becomes but. A common mistake I hear is to replace the T with nothing. So it's not ba, it's but. Can you hear that sound? Now here's a classic example I'm sure you've heard. Bottle of water becomes bottle of water. But that's not a whole sentence, so let's make it, it's a cold bottle of water. In it, mate. The I sound becomes more of an oi. So my becomes my. Buy becomes boy. Nice becomes nice. I becomes oi. Now it's your turn. How would you say this? I am what I am. I am what I am. And what about this one? Time to buy a nice house. Now, house leads me on to the final one in this section. The owl sound in house and out becomes an a. Found, round, sound becomes found, round, sound. And house, remember you drop the H, so it's ass.
This car belongs to the Pakistani ambassador.
It does?
Typical, isn't it? I've been out of jail 5 minutes and already I'm in a hot car.
Let's put them all together in a sentence. I found out that you don't know nothing about double negatives, innit? Shut your mouth. I'm watching the footy. I ain't got time to see my brother. By the way, that's another thing about the London accent is the use of ain't. Some people consider it poor English, but it has a fine old pedigree, first attested in 1696. Arkley Shoemaker. These shoes ain't ugly, but they don't fit me. Now let's move on to the Cockney accent, London's most famous accent of all. But is it even an accent? I'll come to that shortly, but firstly, the strict definition is that a true Cockney must have been born within the sound of Bow Bells. That's St Mary le Bow Church in Cheapside in the City of London. However, this definition is nonsense. There are no maternity hospitals within earshot of Bow Bells, and there hasn't been one since the 1950s. And where does this definition come from? Well, it goes back a long time to the lexicographer John Minshew, one of the first ever dictionary writers, who wrote in his 1617 work, Doctor in Linguas, a Cockney, applied only to one born within the sound of Bow Bell, that is, in the City of London, and he wrote that at a time before the invention of the automobile. The part in green in this map is how far you can hear the sound of Bow Bells now, and the yellow part, how far the sound of Bow Bells could be heard in the 1850s, that is, before the age of cards, but still a noisy city. In fact, in the Middle Ages, Dick Whittington, the first Lord Mayor of London, could hear the Bow Bells on Highgate Hill, that's 5 miles away or 8 kilometres away from the Bow Bells in Cheapside. At that time, the Bow Bells would have covered most of what is London now. However, there is a broader definition which makes more sense, and that is that traditionally Cockneys come from the East End of London, which was the working class area to the east of the City of London. That's fair enough, but it's a geographical location. It says nothing about accent. So you could be a member of the royal family, but if you were born in that area, then you're a Cockney. And my grandmother was born in Sydney Street in Mile End, right in the heart of the East End, and my mother was born in Shoreditch. So it makes them both Cockneys, but neither of them had that accent. In fact, my grandmother would have been horrified if you called her a Cockney. She would have chased you down the street with a rolling pin. She aspired for her and her family to rise the social ranks and to leave behind the poverty of the East End. So now I'm going to say something controversial here. The Cockney accent doesn't exist. Or maybe it does, but it depends on your definition. There is no accent unique to the East End of London, or not anymore. If there was, then there should be a unique lexical set defining the London accent from the East End, and I've never seen it. However, if by a Cockney you mean the working class accent of London and Essex and those environments, then yes, it still exists, and that's how I use it. Some people say that they can recognize an East End Cockney from a South Londoner, from someone from North London, and someone from West London. But when you ask them to define the features in terms of phonetics that distinguish each of these accents, they can't, or they just say something very vague. Basically, a working class London accent could be from anywhere in London or nearby. Now I've got 5 clips of Londoners, and if you're unfamiliar with the London accent, if it's new to you, then listen to the pronunciation features I just mentioned, and you'll find many of them in these clips. And if you're already an expert on the London accent, and if you're one of those people that thinks they can distinguish between different parts of London, then my challenge is listen to these speakers, and only one of them is a true East End Cockney. Which one is it? Let us know how you did in the comments.
You know, it was fields, trees, canals, you know, fishing from a young age. I mean, when we were, 12, 13, we would go night fishing down the canal, me and my mates, and walk, from...
I'm not one of these born with a silver spoon in your mouth elite person. I mean, we were brought up in a very tough environment, so you had to go and fend for yourself.
We had a real explosive kind of relationship, and I never really understood why we had split up. But I think one day I just kind of realised that I was acting like the man and he was acting like the woman, and I was sick of it. He was like 7 years older than me.
Because you know what? We do stuff that keeps us well without realising that's what's keeping us well. So exercise, going out with your mates, going to a gig, spending time with people you love.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. In Hertford, Hereford and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen.
Oh, no.
Did you get it right? One was Vinnie Jones, who's from Watford and actually grew up with Jason Statham. 2 was Alan Sugar, the one true Cockney from Hackney, or should I say Hackney. 3 was Amy Winehouse from Southgate in North London. 4 is Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, from Tooting in South London. And number 5 was Eliza Doolittle, who's actually Audrey Hepburn, who was from Belgium. But even if it was the real character, Eliza Doolittle, the poster child for the Cockney accent, she was from Lisson Grove in the west of London, a long way from the East End and the sound of Bow Bells. So the most famous Cockney of all wasn't even a Cockney. So a Cockney accent is simply a working class London accent. And class is so important when it comes to the London accent, and indeed to all British accents. A middle class Londoner generally speaks differently to a working class Londoner. And this is a much greater feature than ethnicity, for example. Anyway, we'll return to that in a minute. And just so there's no ambiguity, from now on, If I say a Cockney accent, I mean a working class London accent because it's shorter. By the way, we haven't discussed Cockney rhyming slang yet. If you want to find out more about that, then feast your mince pies on this little beauty. Now let's look at SSBE, the preferred term, not RP. I've already mentioned this in other videos, but briefly, the reason I don't like saying RP is firstly because it stands for received pronunciation, and received in this context means accepted, in the same way that received wisdom means the accepted wisdom. The implication is that if you don't speak RP, then your accent is somehow unacceptable, or worse, inferior, and it reeks of snobbery. So personally, I don't like it. And secondly, nobody can quite agree what an RP accent is. Some say that it's the way the Queen spoke, while others say it's a middle class accent. But they are very different accents. So you end up starting dividing RP into different types of RP, and it gets really confusing. No, SSBE stands for Standard Southern British English, and it is more easily defined. It's the middle class accent spoken mostly, but not entirely, in southern Britain. And a great percentage of those people are to be found in London, which is indeed in southern Britain. I'm not going through all the features of an SSBE accent. Most of my teaching videos use that accent. And in fact, it's kind of like the standard accent. It's the one that's used in the phonetics of dictionaries, in teaching materials. If you get the phonetics to the side of it, that will be a representation of this accent. I'm going to return to this mango that I talked about in the beginning of the video, because it is a good metaphor for the London accent, and I do like my metaphors. So the London accents are like a ripe mango, reddish, sometimes green. So if you can say that the red part is the Cockney accent, the working class London accent, and the green part is the SSB accent. When you come across Londoners, some of them there will be in the deep red, some will be in the very bright green here, but most people, yeah, I would say most people, are somewhere in between, including myself. I think my accent varies from who I'm meeting, where I'm meeting, how I'm feeling, from video to video. But when I'm teaching English, it's much closer to the green, but sometimes it strays up a bit to the to slightly red, not very red, not up here. Okay, does that all make sense? Does it make sense? Briefly, let's look at another accent you might hear in London, though not on the street that I grew up on, and that is the posh accent. Now, I don't like the term posh accent either, but I'm using it because it's the one that every British person will recognize, and I can't think of anything better at the moment. But basically, it's an upper middle class accent, or an upper class accent. So if you went to a public school, now remember that in Britain, a public school is an elite private school, for those of you who are unaware of the British education system. So examples of people who speak this accent, well, Boris Johnson is an example, Hugh Grant, sound like that, Dame Judi Dench, who's not from London, by the way. I think she's from York, but that's my point. It's not really a regional accent. You can find the accent anywhere. It's more of a class thing. It defines your upbringing, and you do hear it sometimes in London, so that's why I mentioned it. But if you are in London, all you need to do is take the Underground to Highgate Station and listen to the station announcement on the train.
The next station is Highgate.
In SSBE, you'd say Highgate. I say Highgate. In a strong London accent, you might say Highgate. The announcer is very posh and she says Highgate. Let's have a look at the other languages of London, and there are many. And we're also going to have a look at MLE, Multicultural London English, in a moment. So, according to the 2021 census, 78.4% of Londoners were native English speakers. And here's a question for you. Which language is second? What do you think? Well, you may be surprised to learn that the answer is Romanian. 159,338 people spoke Romanian as their main language, with 1.9%. Did you get it? And after that, Spanish, followed by Polish, and then Bengali, and then Portuguese. And 1,310 people spoke Welsh at home. Now, many linguists have tried to analyze the native London accents in terms of ethnicity, and that's the 78%, not the non-native speakers. But as I said earlier, class plays a far more important role. And that's not to say that immigrants haven't heavily influenced the evolution of the London accent, because they have, and it's nothing new. They've done that for more than 1,000 years. Immigrants to London traditionally came to the East End. So, for example, the Huguenots were refugees from the 16th and 17th centuries, and they were mostly French Protestants fleeing religious persecution. And many settled in Spitalfields and other parts of East London. A lot of Jewish immigrants came in the late 19th century, and they came from Eastern Europe, and the Jews were fleeing pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe, and they settled primarily in the East End. There were large numbers of Irish and Flemish immigrants, and all of these, they settled in the East End, and they would have had a great influence on the Cockney accent. And in the post-war years, there have been immigrants from a great number of places, especially from former British colonies, such as from the Caribbean, from the Indian subcontinent. And currently, one accent in London is getting a lot of attention, is multicultural London English. And I thought I'd get the opinion of an expert, so I asked accent coach Luke Nicholson to analyse the accent of MLE speaker John Boyega. Listen to this.
Does John Boyega have tattoos? Yeah, I do. I didn't show him much. I've had tattoos for a long time. I just wasn't showing them a lot. So whenever people see my arms, they're like, oh. But yeah, I've a few tattoos, yeah. This is a tattoo that I got in representation of my sisters, my two older siblings.
So the speaker here is speaking MLE, that's Multicultural London English. It's an accent that you'll hear all around you if you travel to London, particularly East London. This is an accent that was born out of lots of immigration to London after the Second World War. Immigration from the Caribbean, from the Indian subcontinent, from Africa. And once these immigrants had moved to London, particularly in the East End, they had kids, and those kids learnt English, but with some influence from their parents' original language. And London is a linguistic and cultural melting pot, and so you have all of these speakers who are speaking English but have these different influences from around the world, and also mixing with Londoners or people living in London whose ancestry is white British, so people who were Cockneys, and this formed multicultural London English. And you'll find speakers of all ethnicities, all heritages, speaking this accent today. You've probably already heard of Cockney. This is the traditional East End accent in London. But after World War II, once a lot of London had been bombed, these Cockneys moved out further east. So there's lots of people in Essex nowadays who speak similar to Cockney because their grandparents had moved out, or great-grandparents, after the Second World War. And so once these people left, that left some room for immigrants to come in again to the East End. And London has always been a home for immigrants, people coming in from all over the world. And so it makes sense that new accents are going to be born out of this.
What are some of the characteristics of John Boyega's accent, or London MLE accent?
One of the features of MLE is a very forward oo vowel. So the vowel sound in goose and who, for instance, can be very front. It's also very front in my accent. You'll notice it in his pronunciation of tattoo, so when he says tattoo, tattoo, you can hear that oo sound is very front. It sounds quite similar to a French or German oo type vowel.
I have a few tattoos, yeah. A few tattoos, yeah.
Something else in his accent that we have in Cockney and other accents as well around the UK is that the NG sounds, the velar nasal, like in showing, is pronounced as an N, an alveolar sound. So showin, siblings, rather than showing, sibling.
Wasn't showing them a lot. Wasn't showing them a lot. Two older siblings.
What's the difference between Cockney and MLE? Well, one difference is the pronunciation of the vowels in face and goat. In Cockney, these are fairly wide diphthongs. There's a lot of movement in these vowels. So you'll find face and goat. This has a lot of movement, A, O. But in MLE, you might find that they are narrow diphthongs, there's not much movement, or that they are monophthongs, so just one sound, so E and O, so face, goat.
It's interesting what you say about the Blitz, the bombing of the East End, and a lot of Cockneys moved out and immigrants moved into part of the East End. I know this. I used to work in Harlow Town, or as they call it, Harlow Town. But when I worked there, I live in London, but I worked in Harlow Town. I used to get the train, and the announcement always made me laugh because the guy who gave the announcement said, the next train is the 1352 to Liverpool Street. And I say, where? And every day it's Liverpool Street. And I say, where is? I want to looking on the map for this place called Liverpool Street. And of course it's Liverpool Street, but it's just that's how that would have confused a lot of people.
And of course you mentioned the H dropping there from Harlow to Arlo. And this H dropping is very, very common across accents in England. So you'll find it in Cockney, but you'll also find it in Bristol and Leeds. The MLE speakers tend to pronounce H, for instance. There are MLE speakers who drop it, but the majority pronounce it.
I hope you enjoyed that. Do check out the playlist for the other videos on this series of the accents of Britain. And if you're interested in the history of the English language, then do sign up to my newsletter. Link in the description. That's all for now. See you soon. Bye.